The day the sky burned started like any other Tuesday morning. In Tokyo, children walked to school under cherry blossom trees. In New York, coffee shops filled with workers rushing to their offices. In Mumbai, street vendors set up their stalls as the sun rose over the crowded city. Nobody looked up. Nobody expected anything to change. Humanity had made first contact with alien life just 3 years ago. The Galactic Concord, a federation of over 200 species, had welcomed Earth into their community. Humans were considered young and primitive but harmless. They were given a small seat at a very large table and told to be grateful. Most humans were grateful. They marveled at the alien technologies, the faster-than-light travel, the promise of exploring distant stars. They believed they had entered a new age of peace and progress. They were wrong. The Valith Dominion had watched humanity with cold interest. The Valith were an ancient race of insectoid conquerors. They stood 8 feet tall, with armored bodies and compound eyes that showed no emotion. For 12,000 years, they had expanded their empire by crushing weaker species. They saw no reason to stop now. The Concord had rules against attacking member species. The Valith did not care about rules. They had broken them before. The other species always complained, always issued formal statements, and always did nothing. The Valith knew this pattern well. On that Tuesday morning, their fleet appeared above Earth without warning. The first sign of trouble came when satellites stopped working. Then the communications networks went silent. People looked at their phones and saw no signal. They looked at their televisions and saw only static. Some laughed nervously. Some complained about the inconvenience. Then the fire came down from the sky. The Valith did not invade. They did not negotiate. They did not even announce themselves. They simply opened fire with weapons that humanity could not understand. Beams of focused plasma fell like rain on the major cities of Earth. Tokyo vanished in 3 minutes. The cherry blossoms, the school children, the ancient temples and modern towers, all of it turned to ash and glass. The heat was so intense that the ground itself melted. New York followed. Then London. Then Beijing, Moscow, Mumbai, Cairo, Sydney. 17 cities in total, spread across every continent. Each one was chosen to cause maximum damage and maximum terror. The attack lasted 3 hours. When it ended, 2.3 billion people were dead. The survivors emerged from basements and subway tunnels to find a world transformed. Where great cities had stood, there were now only craters of molten rock. The smoke rose so high that it blocked the sun. For weeks afterward, the sky stayed dark. The Galactic Concord responded with a formal statement of condemnation. They expressed their deep concern about the Valith actions. They called for a peaceful resolution. They did absolutely nothing else. The other species had seen this before. They knew how the story went. A young species angered the Valith. The Valith destroyed them. Life continued. It was sad, perhaps, but it was simply how the galaxy worked. Humans were not the first species to be crushed, and they would not be the last. The Valith expected humanity to surrender. They expected the survivors to scatter and hide. They expected to move in, strip the planet of resources, and add Earth to their long list of conquered worlds. They did not understand humans at all. In the ruins of Geneva, survivors gathered in an underground bunker that had once served as a military command center. The power flickered. The air smelled of smoke and death. People sat in shocked silence, trying to understand what had happened to their world. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood before them. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had served in the Japanese self-defense force for 30 years. She had seen conflict before, but nothing like this. Nobody had seen anything like this. She looked at the faces around her. Military officers, government officials, scientists, engineers, the lucky ones, the ones who had been underground when the fire came. They looked back at her with despair in their eyes. "They think we are finished," she said quietly. Her voice was steady even though her hands shook. "The Valith believe they have broken us. They think we will crawl into holes and wait to die." She paused and looked at a screen showing satellite images of the destruction. Tokyo, her hometown, was a black scar on the earth. "They do not know us," she continued. "They do not know what we are capable of. They see a young species with primitive technology. They see easy prey." She turned back to face the room. Her eyes were hard now, filled with something that went beyond grief. "They made a mistake. The worst mistake any species has ever made in the history of this galaxy. They did not kill us all. They left survivors. And survivors remember. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Humanity did not fall apart. Instead, it came together in ways it never had before. Old enemies became allies. Nations that had fought each other for centuries now shared resources and knowledge freely. Religious groups set aside their differences. Political parties stopped their arguments. None of that mattered anymore. There was only one thing that mattered now: survival and revenge. The scattered governments merged into a single entity called the United Terran Authority. Every resource was pooled. Every factory was converted to military production. Every scientist was assigned to a single task: finding a way to fight back. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, engineers opened sealed vaults that contained nuclear warheads from the old wars. These weapons had been built to destroy other humans. Now, they would be rebuilt for a different purpose. The work was hard and slow. Human technology was primitive compared to the Valith. Their ships were faster. Their weapons were stronger. Their shields could stop anything humanity had. But humans had something the Valith did not understand. They had the ability to adapt. They had creativity born from desperation. And they had anger, cold, patient anger, that would not fade. In the months after the attack, Valith ships entered Earth's orbit. They established bases on the Moon and Mars. They began mining operations, treating the solar system as their property. They sent occasional patrols to the surface of Earth, expecting to find only dying refugees. They found empty ruins. The humans had vanished underground like ghosts. The Valith commanders reported back to their leaders. The humans were hiding, they said. They were broken and scared. It was only a matter of time before they died out completely. There was no need to waste resources hunting them down. The reports were wrong. Underground, in bunkers and tunnels spread across the planet, humanity was not dying. It was preparing. Factories ran day and night. Scientists studied captured Valith technology, looking for weaknesses. Soldiers trained for a war that would be unlike anything in human history. Admiral Tanaka oversaw it all. She slept only a few hours each night. She read every report, approved every plan, and visited every major facility. When people lost hope, she reminded them of what had been taken from them. Remember Tokyo, she would say. Remember New York. Remember every city they burned. Remember every person they killed. We owe them a debt, and we will pay it in full. The first year passed. Then the second. The Valith grew comfortable. They stopped looking for human survivors. They assumed the problem had solved itself. In the darkness beneath the Earth, humanity finished its preparations. New weapons were ready. New ships were hidden in secret locations across the solar system. New tactics had been developed, designed specifically to exploit Valith weaknesses. Admiral Tanaka gathered her commanders for a final meeting. On the table before them lay detailed plans for the largest military operation in human history. They believe we are dead, she said. They believe they can do whatever they want without consequence. It is time to teach them otherwise. She looked at each commander in turn. We are not going to ask for help. We are not going to beg for mercy. We are going to show the galaxy what happens when you try to destroy humanity. We are going to make them remember this lesson for the next 10,000 years. She placed her hand on the plans. It begins now. 2 years had passed since the sky burned. The Valith had grown comfortable in their conquest. Their ships orbited Earth, like vultures, circling a corpse. Their mining operations on the Moon ran without interruption. Their forward bases on Mars expanded every month. From their perspective, everything was going according to plan. Earth had gone silent. No radio transmissions. No signs of organized activity. The occasional drone sweep showed empty cities and abandoned roads. The Valith commanders sent reports to their home world saying the human problem had solved itself. The survivors were probably dying slowly in their underground holes. The galaxy had already forgotten about humanity. Other species had their own concerns. Trade agreements needed negotiation. Border disputes required attention. The extinction of one primitive species was barely worth mentioning at Concord meetings. Nobody was watching Earth anymore. That was exactly what humanity wanted. Commander Maria Reyes crawled through a narrow tunnel on Mars, her breath fogging in the thin atmosphere of her helmet. She had been a cargo pilot before the attack. Now she led a guerrilla cell of 40 fighters operating behind enemy lines. The red dirt of Mars crunched beneath her hands and knees. Above her, through several meters of rock, a Valeth supply depot hummed with activity. She could hear the vibrations of their machines, feel the trembling of their heavy footsteps. Her brother Carlos followed close behind. He was younger by 3 years, with the same dark eyes and determined jaw. He carried a device that their engineers had built from stolen Valeth parts. If it worked, it would disable the depot's shields for exactly 30 seconds. 30 seconds was not much time, but it was enough. They reached the access point, a forgotten maintenance shaft that the Valeth had never bothered to seal. Why would they? They did not expect resistance. They did not even look for it. Reyes held up her hand, counting down with her fingers. 3, 2, 1. Carlos activated the device. The lights in the tunnel flickered as electromagnetic pulses scrambled the depot's systems. Reyes burst through the hatch, her team flooding in behind her. The Valeth guards were large and strong, but they were slow to react. They had grown lazy during 2 years of easy occupation. They reached for weapons that would not fire. They called for backup on communication systems that had gone dead. The fight lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, the depot was in human hands. More importantly, Reyes found what she had come for: a Valeth command cipher, the key to their military communication network. But victory came at a price. Carlos took a plasma bolt to the chest while covering their retreat. He died in his sister's arms, his last words asking if they had succeeded. Reyes carried his body back through the tunnels. She buried him in a small cave overlooking the red Martian plains. She did not cry. There would be time for tears later. Right now, there was only the mission. The cipher reached Earth 3 weeks later, smuggled in a cargo container that the Valeth inspectors never thought to check. Human analysts worked on it around the clock. Within a month, they had cracked the code. What they discovered changed everything. The Valeth dominion was vast, spanning hundreds of star systems, but it was also hollow. Their military was optimized for quick strikes and overwhelming force. They had never faced prolonged resistance. Their supply lines were long and poorly defended. Their commanders were arrogant and predictable. Most importantly, they had no experience with an enemy that refused to give up. Admiral Tanaka read the intelligence reports in her underground command center. The walls around her were covered with maps and charts showing Valeth positions across the solar system. Red dots marked their bases. Blue dots marked human assets that the enemy did not know existed. There were a lot of blue dots. For 2 years, humanity had been busy, not just building weapons, but building something far more important: a network of hidden bases and secret allies that stretched from the asteroid belt to the outer planets. Mining ships had been converted into stealth transports. Asteroids had been hollowed out and turned into supply depots. A small fleet of warships was hidden in the shadow of Jupiter, invisible to Valeth sensors. Human agents had infiltrated Valeth operations across the system. They worked as slaves and servants, keeping their heads down while gathering information. They learned Valeth routines, identified weaknesses, and waited for the signal. The signal was coming. Dr. James Okonkwo was one of the scientists working on captured Valeth technology. He had been a physics professor before the attack, teaching graduate students about quantum mechanics and theoretical energy systems. Now he spent his days taking apart alien machines and figuring out how to break them. The Valeth technology was advanced, he discovered, but surprisingly fragile. Their systems were centralized, designed for efficiency rather than resilience. Knock out one key component, and entire networks would fail. They build for dominance, Okonkwo explained to the military commanders, not for survival. They have never needed to worry about their ships being damaged because nobody has ever seriously threatened them. He held up a small device, no larger than a human fist. This is an electromagnetic pulse generator based on their own technology. When activated near a Valeth ship, it will scramble their systems for approximately 90 seconds. Their weapons will not fire. Their shields will not work. Their engines will not respond. He smiled grimly. 90 seconds is a very long time in a battle. Across the solar system, human engineers were building more of these devices. They were also building missiles, drones, boarding pods, and 100 other tools of war. Each one was designed to exploit the specific weaknesses that 2 years of study had revealed. The Valeth had better technology, but humans were creative in ways that the aliens could not imagine. They found solutions in unexpected places. They adapted and improvised. They turned weakness into strength. On Earth, young men and women trained for a kind of warfare that had never existed before. They learned to fight in zero gravity, to board enemy ships, to survive in the cold vacuum of space. They practiced again and again until every movement was automatic. They were not soldiers in the traditional sense. They were survivors who had lost everything. Their families were dead. Their homes were gone. Their planet was occupied by creatures that viewed them as insects. They had nothing left to lose. That made them dangerous. In the occupied zones, the psychological preparation was just as important. Human resistance cells spread whispers among the alien occupiers. Strange symbols appeared on walls. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Valith soldiers began reporting sightings of humans who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. The Valith commanders dismissed these reports as nerves and superstition. But the unease spread. Soldiers who had never known fear began to feel it. They started jumping at shadows, sleeping poorly, requesting transfers to other postings. Fear was a weapon too. Admiral Tanaka reviewed the final preparations with her senior staff. Everything was ready. The weapons, the ships, the soldiers, the intelligence network. 2 years of secret work was about to bear fruit. We have one chance, she told them. One chance to surprise them. After we strike, they will know we are alive. They will come for us with everything they have. We must make that first strike count. She pulled up a holographic map showing Valith positions across the system. We hit them everywhere at once. Supply depots, fuel stations, communication relays. We blind them and cripple them before they can respond. Then we disappear into the dark and prepare for the real war. One of her officers raised a concern. What if something goes wrong? What if they are ready for us? Tanaka considered the question for a moment. Then we die fighting instead of hiding. Either way, the galaxy will know that humanity did not go quietly. They will know that we stood up and fought back against an empire that has terrorized this region of space for 12,000 years. She looked at each face in the room. Our children are dead. Our cities are ash. We have nothing left except our will to survive and our desire for justice. That will have to be enough. She straightened her uniform and took a deep breath. Send the signal. Operation Awakening begins in 6 hours. Across the solar system, hidden communicators buzzed to life. In asteroid bases and converted freighters, in underground bunkers and slave quarters, humans received the message they had been waiting 2 years to hear. The silence was over. The war was about to begin. Commander Reyes received the signal on Mars, standing beside her brother's grave. She thought about Carlos and all the others who had died during the occupation. She thought about the billions who had burned on the first day. She whispered to the red Martian wind, "We are coming for them, brother. Every single one." Then she turned and walked toward her ship. There was work to do. The attack came at exactly midnight, Earth time. Across 47 different locations in the solar system, human forces struck simultaneously. The Valith had no warning. They had no time to prepare. One moment, everything was normal. The next moment, their empire was burning. Supply Station Vex 7 was the first to fall. It floated in the asteroid belt, a massive structure that processed fuel for the entire occupation fleet. 300 Valith crew members worked there, none of them expecting trouble. A small ship approached, broadcasting the identification codes of a routine cargo delivery. The station's sensors saw nothing unusual. The docking bay doors opened without hesitation. The ship was filled with explosives. The blast tore through the station's central core, rupturing fuel tanks and breaking the structure into pieces. Secondary explosions followed as stored energy cells ignited. Within minutes, Vex 7 was nothing but debris floating in the darkness. Similar scenes played out across the system. Fuel depots exploded. Communication relays went silent. Patrol ships vanished from sensors without even sending distress signals. The Valith commanders woke to chaos. Reports flooded in faster than they could process. Attack on Theta Station. Attack on the Mars orbital platform. Attack on the lunar mining facility. Attack. 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 They tried to coordinate a response, but their communication network was crippled. The cipher that Commander Reyes had captured allowed human hackers to flood Valith channels with false signals. Real messages were lost in a sea of noise. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Valith Dominion did not know what was happening. Sergeant Wei Chen was not supposed to be a hero. Before the attack, he had been a construction worker in Shanghai. He had built office buildings and apartment complexes. He had never fired a weapon in his life. Now he was leading a boarding party onto a Valith carrier ship. The carrier was called the Eternal Blade. It was one of the largest ships in the occupation fleet, carrying thousands of soldiers and hundreds of smaller combat vessels. Taking it would be a major victory. Failing would mean death. Chen's team approached in boarding pods that had been built in secret factories on Earth. The pods were small and fast, designed to punch through the weak points in Valith hull armor. 12 pods carried 60 soldiers toward the massive ship. 3 pods were destroyed by defensive fire before they could reach the hull. Chen felt the impact as his pod slammed into the carrier's side. Cutting lasers burned through the metal, creating an entry point. Then they were inside, fighting in the corridors of an alien ship. The Valith soldiers were big. They stood 8 feet tall and weighed 3 times as much as a human. Their armored bodies could take multiple hits from standard weapons. Their claws could tear through metal. But the humans had advantages too. The corridors were dark. Human engineers had hacked the ship's lighting system, plunging everything into blackness. Valith compound eyes were designed for bright light. In darkness, they were nearly blind. The humans wore night vision equipment. They could see perfectly. Chen moved through the corridors like a ghost, his weapon firing in controlled bursts. Valith soldiers fell before they even knew he was there. His team spread through the ship, hitting key systems and eliminating officers. A Valith guard caught Chen by surprise, slamming him into a wall. Claws raked across his chest, cutting through his armor and into his flesh. Pain exploded through his body. Chen did not stop. He could not stop. He jammed his weapon under the alien's chin and fired until it stopped moving. Then he pulled himself up and kept going, blood dripping down his side. His team found him 20 minutes later, still fighting, still advancing toward the ship's command center. He had taken 3 major wounds. Any one of them would have stopped a normal person. But Chen was not fighting for himself. He was fighting for Shanghai, for his family who had burned on the first day, for every human who had ever been told that resistance was futile. The Valith captain surrendered when human soldiers broke down the door to his command center. He looked at the small, wounded creatures that had taken his ship and could not understand what he was seeing. "How?" he asked. "You are primitives. You should not be able to do this." Chen smiled through bloody teeth. "You do not know us at all." Across the galaxy, other species began to pay attention. Intelligence agencies scrambled to understand what was happening in the Sol system. The Valith, the ancient conquerors, the terror of 100 worlds, were being attacked by a species they had supposedly destroyed 2 years ago. The Rithani were one of the oldest species in the Concord. They had survived for 1,000,000 years by being careful and patient. They had watched the Valith rise and fall and rise again. They had seen countless species burn, but they had never seen anything like this. The Rithani ambassador reviewed the intelligence reports in her private quarters. Human ships appearing from nowhere. Human soldiers fighting with impossible ferocity. Human tactics that no species had ever used before. She sent a single encrypted message to Earth. "We are watching." It was not an offer of help. The Rithani did not take sides in conflicts, but it was an acknowledgement. Someone in the galaxy had noticed that humanity was still alive. The first wave of attacks lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Valith had lost more ships and installations than they had in the previous century of expansion. Their occupation fleet was crippled. Their supply lines were broken. Their commanders were in shock. Admiral Tanaka reviewed the results from her command center. The operation had succeeded beyond her hopes. Nearly every target had been destroyed or captured. Human casualties were lower than expected, but she knew this was just the beginning. "They will respond," she told her officers. "The Valith High Command will not accept this defeat. They will send reinforcements. They will come to burn us for good this time." She pulled up long-range sensor data showing Valith fleet movements. "The Third Fleet is already mobilizing. 400 warships. They are coming to finish what they started 2 years ago." One of her officers looked worried. "Can we stop them? Our forces are much smaller." Tanaka shook her head slowly. "We cannot defeat them in open battle. Not yet. We are not strong enough. But we do not need to defeat them. We need to break them." She explained her plan. The human forces would not stand and fight. They would scatter and hide. They would become ghosts in the darkness between planets. They would strike and vanish, until the Valeth fleet was exhausted and terrified. "They have never fought an enemy like us," Tanaka said. "They conquer through overwhelming force. They expect their victims to give up when faced with superior numbers. We will not give up. We will never give up. And eventually, they will understand that this war cannot be won." The human fleet began dispersing within hours. Ships that had gathered for the attack now scattered to hidden bases across the outer system. Soldiers who had fought together said goodbye and went their separate ways. They would fight alone for a while. Small groups hitting targets of opportunity. Wolf packs hunting in the dark. Each one carrying on the war in whatever way they could. Chen was evacuated to a medical station hidden in the rings of Saturn. His wounds were serious but not fatal. The doctors told him he would need months to recover. He told them to give him a week. As he lay in his hospital bed, he thought about the battle, about the Valeth captain who could not understand how primitives had taken his ship, about the look of fear in alien eyes when humans emerged from the darkness. For 2 years, humanity had been afraid, hiding underground, waiting for death, wondering if they would ever see the stars again. Now the fear was on the other side. Chen smiled and closed his eyes. The pain in his chest was nothing compared to the satisfaction in his heart. The Valeth had wanted to destroy humanity. Instead, they had created something worse. They had created an enemy that would never stop, never surrender, never forgive. They had created their own nightmare, and the nightmare was just getting started. The Valeth Third Fleet entered the Sol system with 400 warships. It was the largest military force assembled in this region of space in over 1,000 years. Commanders across the fleet expected a quick victory. They expected to find the human rebels, crush them, and return home as heroes. They found nothing. Earth was empty. The moon bases were abandoned. Mars was silent. Even the debris from the recent attacks had been cleaned away. The Sol system looked like a graveyard, quiet and still, under the cold light of distant stars. Hive Lord Vegzeth commanded the Third Fleet from his flagship, the Unbreakable Will. He was old by Valeth standards, with thick armor scarred by 100 battles. He had crushed rebellions on a dozen worlds. He had never failed. He stood on his command deck, compound eyes scanning the empty space around him, and felt something he had not felt in centuries. Uncertainty. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Find them. Find any sign of them." His officers searched. They scanned every asteroid, every moon, every corner of the system. They found abandoned facilities and cold reactor cores. They found graves and monuments to the human dead. They found nothing alive. Then ships started to disappear. The first loss was a supply vessel, traveling between the main fleet and a forward position. It simply vanished from sensors. No distress call. No sign of battle. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. Vegzeth sent patrol ships to investigate. 2 of them never reported back. The attacks were impossible to predict. They came from asteroid shadows and the dark spaces between planets. Human wolf packs, small groups of ships working together, would strike a target and vanish before the fleet could respond. A fuel tanker destroyed near Jupiter. A communications relay taken out near Saturn. A troop transport ambushed in the asteroid belt. Its crew found dead with a message carved into the hull. "We remember Tokyo." The Valeth crews began to crack. They were warriors, bred for conquest and trained for battle. They were not afraid of enemies they could see. But this enemy was invisible. This enemy struck without warning and disappeared like smoke. Soldiers started seeing things that were not there. Shadows moved in empty corridors. Strange sounds echoed through ship compartments. Officers who had never doubted themselves began jumping at every alarm. Vexeth tried to restore order. He executed soldiers who showed fear. He broadcast messages telling his crews that the humans were just primitives, just insects. Nothing to be afraid of. Nobody believed him anymore. The psychological warfare was deliberate. Admiral Tanaka had studied Valeth history. She knew they had never faced an enemy who refused to confront them directly. Their entire military doctrine was built on the assumption that weaker species would either surrender or die in hopeless last stands. Humanity did neither. Humanity haunted them. Human agents infiltrated Valeth ships, posing as slaves taken from conquered worlds. They sabotaged systems and spread rumors. They left evidence of their presence in places where it would be found: a human handprint in blood on an engine room wall, a recording of human voices playing on abandoned frequencies. One ship found its entire water supply contaminated with a harmless but foul-tasting chemical. The crew was not harmed, but they could not forget that humans had touched everything they consumed. Another ship discovered that someone had accessed their historical database and added entries about every Valith atrocity ever committed, every species they had destroyed, every world they had burned, every crime of their empire, all of it laid out for the crew to see. The message was clear. We know what you are. We know what you have done, and we will make you pay for all of it. Admiral Tanaka commanded the campaign from a hollowed-out asteroid in the outer system. Her headquarters was cold and cramped, constantly moving to avoid detection. She slept only a few hours at a time, her dreams filled with fire and screaming. Her aide, a young officer named David Park, brought her reports every few hours. Ship movements, attack results, casualty figures. She read each one carefully, making adjustments to the plan, sending new orders to distant commanders. Park watched her with worried eyes. She had been running on determination alone for weeks. Her health was suffering, but she refused to rest. "Admiral," he said carefully one day, "you need to sleep. You cannot command the fleet if you collapse from exhaustion." Tanaka looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death. "I will sleep when this is over. I will sleep when they understand what they did to us. Not before." She returned to her reports. Park knew better than to argue. He had lost his family in the attack on Seoul. He understood the cold fire that burned in the Admiral's heart. It burned in all of them. The Third Fleet had been in the Sol system for 3 months. They had lost 40 ships without ever seeing the enemy in a direct fight. Morale was collapsing. Supply lines were stretched thin. Crews were exhausted and terrified. Hive Lord Vegzeth received reports from ship captains begging to be allowed to retreat. He received reports of soldiers refusing orders. He received reports of officers who had stopped sleeping entirely, afraid of what might happen if they closed their eyes. He sent a message to Valith High Command, the first admission of difficulty he had ever made in his long career. "These creatures do not fight to win," he wrote. "They fight to make us suffer. We are not hunting them. They are hunting us. They are in the darkness, watching, waiting. Every time we move, they see us. Every time we stop, they strike. I have conquered 100 worlds, and I have never faced anything like this. Send reinforcements. Send everything you have, or accept that the Sol system is lost." The message spread through Valith military channels. Other commanders read it with disbelief. Vegzeth the Conqueror, the greatest warrior of his generation, was asking for help. Against primitives, against a species that should have been extinct. Something had gone very wrong in the Sol system. On Earth, in the ruins of what had been Paris, a small group of resistance fighters celebrated a rare moment of rest. They had been sabotaging Valith supply drops for months, making the occupation forces work harder for every resource. Their leader was a woman named Sophie Dubois. She had been a history teacher before the attack. Now she taught her fighters about human endurance, about Stalingrad and Thermopylae, about people who had refused to give up against impossible odds. "We are not alone," she told them. "Across the system, humans are fighting. In places we cannot see, battles are being won. The enemy is afraid of us now. They came here expecting to find a broken species waiting to die. Instead, they found us." She smiled grimly. "And we are very, very angry." The 4th month came, and Hive Lord Vegzeth made a decision. He ordered the Third Fleet to withdraw from deep space and concentrate around the inner planets. He would establish a strong defensive position, he decided, and force the humans to come to him. It was a reasonable tactical choice. It was also a mistake. The humans had been waiting for exactly this moment. They had scattered and hidden specifically to draw the Valith fleet into deep space, stretching their supply lines, exhausting their crews. Now the fleet was retreating, demoralized and weakened. Admiral Tanaka received the intelligence report in her command center. She read it twice, then looked up at her officers with something like satisfaction. "They are pulling back. They think they can establish a defensive position and wait us out." She shook her head slowly. "They still do not understand. We are not going to wait. We are not going to give them time to recover. We have broken their spirit. Now we break their fleet." She activated the communication system, sending a message to every human ship in the system. "All forces. This is Admiral Tanaka. The enemy is retreating. Phase 2 begins immediately. All ships proceed to Rally Point Jupiter. We attack in 48 hours. From hidden bases across the outer system, human ships began to move. They emerged from asteroid shadows and moon craters, from the rings of Saturn and the storms of Neptune. 200 vessels, each one built in secret, each one crewed by survivors who had nothing left to lose. The United Terran Navy was coming out of the darkness. Sergeant Chen stood on the bridge of his ship, the Shanghai's Revenge. His wounds had healed, leaving thick scars across his chest. He wore them proudly. They reminded him of why he was fighting. Around him, similar ships gathered, cruisers and destroyers, frigates and gunboats, a fleet born from grief and forged in anger. Not as large as the enemy fleet, not as powerful in raw numbers, but infinitely more determined. Chen looked at the stars ahead, where the Valith were waiting. "They do not know we are coming," he said quietly. "They think we are still hiding in the dark. They think we will keep running forever." He smiled, the expression cold and hard. "They are about to learn otherwise." The human fleet accelerated toward Jupiter. Behind them, the darkness of space swallowed their hiding places. Ahead of them, the broken remnants of the Third Fleet waited for a battle they did not know was coming. The hunt was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The Battle of Callisto began at dawn, Earth time. Not that dawn meant anything in the cold space around Jupiter's moons, but humans liked symbols, and there was something right about starting their war for survival as the sun rose over their wounded homeworld. Hive Lord Vegzeth saw the human fleet on his sensors and could not believe what he was looking at. 200 ships, emerging from the direction of the outer system, moving in perfect formation. A fleet that should not exist. A fleet that primitives should not have been able to build. He had expected more guerrilla attacks, more hiding and striking from shadows. He had not expected humanity to meet him in open battle. For a moment, hope flickered in his compound eyes. Open battle was what the Valith understood. Open battle was what they were built for. His fleet still outnumbered the humans 2-1. His ships were larger and better armed. If the humans wanted a straight fight, he would give them one. "All ships, attack formation," he ordered. "Destroy them." The Third Fleet surged forward, confident in their superior numbers. They had been terrorized for months by an enemy they could not see. Now they could see the enemy, and they meant to kill every last one. The battle lasted 4 hours. It was the most brutal engagement in the history of either species. Human ships did not fight like any enemy the Valith had faced before. They did not form neat lines and exchange fire at range. They dove into the middle of enemy formations, attacking from every direction at once. They rammed damaged vessels into Valith ships. They launched boarding pods even in the middle of combat, sending soldiers to capture enemy vessels while the battle raged around them. Sergeant Chen led one of the first boarding actions, crashing his pod into the side of a Valith destroyer. His team fought through corridor after corridor, leaving dead aliens behind them. They reached the engine room and rigged it to explode, then evacuated barely in time. The destroyer died in a ball of fire that took 2 nearby Valith ships with it. Commander Reyes flew with a squadron of fast attack ships, diving through the chaos to hit enemy command vessels. She had painted her brother's name on the side of her ship. Every kill was for Carlos. Every victory was a message to his grave on Mars. She took out 3 enemy frigates before a lucky shot crippled her engines. Rather than retreat, she aimed her damaged ship at the nearest Valith cruiser and accelerated. Her crew evacuated in escape pods moments before the impact. The cruiser broke in half. Reyes floated in space, watching it burn, and smiled inside her helmet. Admiral Tanaka commanded from the battleship, Humanity's Resolve, the largest ship in the human fleet. She watched the battle unfold on holographic displays, issuing orders that sent ships to where they were needed most. The Valith had numbers and firepower. The humans had speed and ferocity. For every human ship destroyed, 2 Valith ships were crippled or captured. The aliens had never faced an enemy that would not stop advancing no matter how much damage they took. 3 hours into the battle, the Valith formation began to collapse. Ships that had been fighting together started to scatter. Crews that had been demoralized by months of psychological warfare finally broke under the pressure of direct combat. Hive Lord Vegzeth watched his fleet fall apart and understood that he had lost. Not just the battle, but everything. His reputation, his career, his belief that the Valith were superior to all other species. He ordered his flagship to retreat, but the humans had anticipated that. A single human frigate, the Remember Geneva, broke from the main battle and pursued. For 6 hours, it chased the massive Valeth ship across the system, never giving up, never falling back. When the flagship's engines finally failed, the Remember Geneva pulled alongside. Boarding teams swarmed through airlocks. Vexith was captured alive, the first Valeth Hive Lord ever to surrender to a lesser species. When asked if he had any final words, Vexith looked at his captors with something that might have been respect. "We should have killed you all when we had the chance." Admiral Tanaka stood before him, a small human woman facing an alien giant. She did not flinch. "Many have tried," she said. "None have succeeded. Remember that." The Battle of Callisto ended with the destruction of the Valeth Third Fleet. Of 400 ships, fewer than 50 survived to flee. Human casualties were significant but not crippling. The United Terran Navy had won its first major victory, but Tanaka knew the war was not over. The Valeth Dominion was vast. They would send more fleets, more armies, more weapons, unless humanity took the fight to them. Over the following months, the United Terran Navy did something that no species had ever done before. They invaded Valeth space. Human ships pushed through system after system, attacking supply lines and military bases. They found allies among the species that the Valeth had conquered and enslaved. They freed slave worlds and armed resistance movements. The galaxy watched in astonishment as the primitives from Earth became the first force in 12,000 years to seriously threaten the Valeth Dominion. The war lasted 18 months in total. The Valeth threw everything they had at humanity, but it was not enough. Their empire was too spread out, their military too centralized, their commanders too used to fighting enemies who gave up easily. Humans did not give up easily. Humans did not give up at all. The final blow came when human forces reached Valeth Prime, the homeworld of the Dominion. They did not glass the planet, as the Valeth had done to Earth. They were not interested in revenge for its own sake. Instead, they demanded unconditional surrender, complete disarmament, reparations to every species the Valeth had wronged, the dissolution of the ruling caste that had led the empire for millennia. The Valeth, broken and humiliated, accepted every term. For the first time in galactic history, a primitive species had brought an ancient empire to its knees. The Galactic Concord convened an emergency session 3 months after the war ended. Representatives from 200 species gathered to discuss the implications of what had happened. The chamber was normally a place of quiet diplomacy and careful words. Today, it buzzed with something close to fear. The Rithani ambassador, old and wise, spoke for many when she addressed the human delegation. "When you joined us, we thought you were children. Curious, fragile, destined to be forgotten. We watched the Valeth attack you, and we did nothing. We assumed you would die like all the others." She paused, her ancient eyes meeting human eyes. "We were wrong. You are not children. You are something we have never seen in all our million years of watching the galaxy. You are a species that grows stronger from tragedy, a species that refuses despair, a species that turns grief into resolve." She bowed her head, a gesture of respect that Rithani rarely gave to anyone. "We underestimated you. We will not make that mistake again." Earth. 5 years after the attack, the sky was blue again. The smoke had cleared. Cities were being rebuilt on the bones of the old ones. Children played in parks that had once been craters. The scars remained. There were memorials everywhere, walls engraved with names, monuments to the fallen, empty spaces where great buildings had stood. Humanity would never forget what had been taken from them. The 2.3 billion dead would be remembered for as long as humans existed. Admiral Yuki Tanaka, now Secretary General of the United Terran Authority, stood before the largest memorial in what had been Tokyo. She was older now, her hair white, her face lined with years of war and grief, but her eyes were still sharp, still burning with the same fire that had carried her through the darkest days. A young officer approached her, one of the new generation who had grown up during the war. "Secretary General? What happens now? The war is over. The Valeth are defeated. What comes next for humanity?" Tanaka looked up at the stars. Once, those lights had represented terror, an endless darkness filled with enemies who wanted to destroy her species. Now they represented something else. Opportunity, challenge, the future. She thought about the journey humanity had taken. From the ashes of near extinction to the defeat of an ancient empire. From victims to victors. From a species that the galaxy had dismissed as primitives to a force that even the oldest civilizations now treated with respect. What happens now? She repeated. We survive. We adapt. We remember. We honor the dead by building something worthy of their sacrifice. She turned to face the young officer. And we make sure the galaxy never forgets what happens when you try to break humanity. We are not a species that gives up. We are not a species that accepts defeat. We fall down, and we get back up. We lose everything, and we start again. She smiled, and for a moment, she looked young again. We are human. And now the galaxy knows what that means. Behind her, the sun rose over Tokyo. Light spread across the memorial, illuminating the names of the dead. Somewhere in the city, construction machines hummed as they built new towers. Children laughed in the streets. Humanity had survived the worst the galaxy could throw at them. They had not just survived, they had grown stronger. They had earned their place among the stars through blood and fire and sheer stubborn refusal to die. The Valeth had wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson about the cost of defiance. Instead, humanity had taught the galaxy a different lesson entirely. Never underestimate the creatures from the third planet of the Sol system. Never corner them. Never assume they will give up. Because humans do not know how to give up. It is simply not in their nature. And that, more than any weapon or technology, was what made them dangerous. The galaxy had learned what humans were capable of. They would never forget.